right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Anwulika Okonjo. I'm the founder of Ijeruka, and I'm very excited to introduce Keren last, the curator and facilitator of Ijeruka's upcoming course, Meeting Our Griots. For those of you who are being introduced to Ijeruka for the first time, Ijeruka is a Pan-African digital learning community, really curating online courses and immersive learning experiences with visionary African and Afro diasporic minds like Keren, as well as many other teachers from all over the continent and the diaspora. I am, just really looking forward to this conversation with Keren. How are you? How are you doing today? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. I was telling you earlier that I was a bit stressed, but otherwise, like I'm very happy as well. Thank you so much for, curating the space and making everything happen. I'm so excited to, how this month and the next will unfold with the course. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
thank you so
And
much.
there's so much to look forward to. I want to just, quickly introduce you. So Karen is a literary curator, a writer, and a multidisciplinary artist from Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. And the course is actually named after a project that she started, Meeting Our Griots as well, or Kokoba. So Karen, I wanted to begin there and just hearing a little bit more about what actually started Meeting Our Griots. Where did the inspiration for this course and that project come from?
Yeah, okay. So I have to go back to my university year and even like to my childhood. So I was born in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, as you mentioned earlier. And then I grew up in France. And in my upbringing, I wasn't exposed to any knowledge production from the continent. And then when I moved to London for my university years, I stumbled upon the work of like African writers. I was at the library. I studied at UE. I also have a bachelor in advertising and communication. And I think I was writing my thesis, and I had to do a lot of like, research on a certain topic. And then I was at the library, and then I stumbled upon the work of Chinua Achebe, who is of course like, the one of the greatest and well-known African writer from Nigeria. And I was reading one of his classic, which is Things Fall Apart. And from then on, I was just like kind of introduced to a history. Of course, like the book is an historical fiction, but it's very much inspired by, historical fact, especially, in colonial time and also the impact of colonization in Nigeria at a certain time. And those are things that I was not necessarily like exposed to while growing up. I knew, the work of like French writer or, the Enlightenment, European philosophers and all of that, but I had no idea about like African literature, right? So I was like in my early 20s, writing my dissertation, and I found the work of Chinua Achebe, and this kind of opened like a Pandora box that I couldn't close, and I just kind of like delve into researching great African writers, teachers, elders, people who really like kind of contributed to uplifting the our knowledge, really, and then this is how the seed of the project was planted. But after, like, I discovered that work, but I never thought that I would kind of, use that as a practice, right? I never knew that African literature would be something that I would have carried, along these years. But the seed was planted at that time, right? So just I went on, I graduated, but I was like, I have to know more. I can't just like graduate and go to like advertising school or do my master's in communication or something like that. So I decided to enroll in the master's in African studies. So that's when like literally everything kind of consolidated. And for me, really learning about like Africa as a whole, but also, its place in the contemporary world and its history and culture and all of that, of course, in academia. And then it was a great course. Like I learned a lot, but with academia, there's also like a lot of ups and down and the curriculum and all of that. So if you really want to kind of, push forward and learn more, you really have to do like self studies, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was on that journey of self study and learning more and deepening, the foundation that I got during my masters. And in 2020, of course, Corona, and we're all indoors, and now we start thinking about life, right? And I was thinking about,
Mhm.
like I miss Ivory Coast, but I'm in London, I want to go back. I'm sure that after 2020, like I would want to decision for me to move, back home. And I was just thinking about the things that I loved, my interest, and I just remember that, I fell in love with African literature, like, years back. And I just decided to, the quickest way for me was to create an Instagram account, right? Where I could share all of my, my learning. And it's also, yeah, I'm sharing, my research, I'm sharing information, but at the same time, I'm learning because it's also a process of me, studying and sharing my research and all this information, right? So I started through Instagram, sharing research, and that's, that's how it all started. And now I'm holding space and curating space for, collective studies. And this project is really about nurturing the imagination, nurturing the imagination with different ways viewing the world, right? And in that case, it's African epistemology, African knowledge, African gnosis, cosmologies, literature, anything that has to do with like knowledge sharing. So yeah, this is how, the project came into being. And its basis is really creating like almost like a sacred space for learning using, literature, but not only written but oral literature as well, so creating that safe sacred learning space and tapping into, the ancient technology of storytelling, because that's where it all started, right? Sharing stories. And I really love this idea or this vision of, the sacred fire, where people would just sit around fire and dance and pray and play music and then sharing stories, right? And those stories could have been stories of the day, what they've been doing during the day, or what is happening in their home. So this is really the idea of tapping into that primal way of sharing knowledge, and sharing and communicating and communing. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I the thing that just kind of sucks me in and is so clear, and I think is embodied in the spirit of this course as well, is the joy of actually reconnecting and immersing ourselves in African storytelling, literature, the exploration of our knowledge. Like there's so much joy pouring out from something that sometimes can be a little bit of a sad conversation for people, like when we recognize for how long we've kind of been our exposure to African stories and things um, had sort of been alienated from us. And
Yes.
so what I love is that like something that kind of a little bit down is actually really exciting and an opportunity to explore and in a way that's truly meaningful. So yeah,
Yes.
I'm just loving that story. And then also what you said about self-study, I think is really at the heart of the invitation for this course, is that once you get down this journey and that fire is kindled, you know, actually investing our time, investing our energy to just keep taking it one step further. And you went on to do a whole master's program, you know. So I really love how it just
I was
stayed with you and
determined.
just, yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yeah,
Um,
because it's like you kind of find ground for identity. You see yourself, you see your stories, and you kind of, like mythopoesis, right? Using literature, poetry. build a certain kind of identity, and it's also about like the inner world, right? How do we build things inside ourselves, right? How do we cultivate our inner world? How
Yeah.
do we nurture? Which what stories, what knowledge, what wisdom, right? So I was like, no, I can't let that go by. I want to study. I want to learn more, and it's also a way to build myself, as a
Yeah.
as an African, as a Black woman in this world, and find like roots somewhere, right?
Yeah. Definitely. So I want to talk a little bit more about the focus for this course in particular, which is Ancestor Sobon Fusome, a Burkinabe author, teacher, and spiritual keeper. So yeah, you were the one who actually introduced me to Sobon
Mm-hmm.
Fusome's work, and in this course, we're centering her book, "The Spirit of Intimacy: T- um, Ancient African Teachings and the Ways of Relationship." So I just wanted to, yeah, hear from you. Like, how did you find Sobonfu's work, and why this book in particular? Why do we start our collective study here?
Yeah. So I think it's the same thing. Like I was on internet searching, reading, getting lost in so many different things. And I think that I found out about Sobonfu Some through the work of her husband, Malido Masome, who is also, a writer, a teacher, a healer, a shaman, who is now passed. He passed away in November, December in 2021. So I think it's also a good thing. Like 1st of November, it's the day of of the dead. Some people are celebrating Halloween, and we are perfect timing. Like in this moment, we are remembering, those ancestors who came, before us and left, before as well, before us, and then we are remembering them. So I think it's like perfect timing. So I found out about Sobun Fusome through the work of Malido Masome, who was her husband. And Malido Masome is also was also writing like his book on his autobiography, right? He was writing about, of course, the impact of colonization, but through what we would call like magic realism, right? But it was simply telling his own story that was based on a different kind of like epistemology, right? A different kind of knowledge production or knowledge sharing, and it was really the root was magic, sorcery, initiation, vision quest, and it was completely different from the autobiography that we usually read, and it was his life was embedded in the spiritual. And from reading his work and researching about his work, I found about the work of his wife, Sobomfu Some, whose name means keepers of the ritual. So in they come from the Dagara people in Burkina Faso, and naming is very important in the culture, in the tradition, because by naming a child, you're remembering throughout the child's life, he will remember, or she will, or they will remember their purpose in life, right? So Malido Masome name means befriending the enemy, and his whole work was about going outside of his town, his community, and sharing and spreading the word with the white man who was the enemy to his his people in Burkina Faso. And Sobomfu Some, she's the keeper of rituals. That's what Sobomfu means. And throughout her life, her purpose was to share those rituals in her community, but also outside her community in the global world, right? So I found out about her work, and most of the work is about rituals, of course, grace, grief, all of this, what we associate with the feminine, right? But she was giving a different layer to what we know, in the feminine sense, all this what we associate with femininity or feminine energy. So Bumfu Some was rooting that in spirituality. So I really love the work, and the Spirit of Intimacy is the first book that I read from her, and I was completely amazed. I think that's the word. I was just amazed at about, how people in that community related to each other, the rituals that they put in place to to energize their bonds, not only with the physical, like the kin, those who are alive, but also like nature as a whole, who were part of their community, and also the ancestors, like the dead. And I was just, amazed at the practices that they put in place, what day of what part of the year, what they would do, the rituals they will carry to energize the community, to breathe life and joy and strengthen those bonds within the community. And one of them was, they have rituals to find solution to conflict, and I found that completely, amazing and creative, and things that we don't necessarily find, or we are not taught. And I find that amazing to just kind of deep dive into a certain culture and find all these tools really for how to live in harmony with the community, with nature, with the ancestors, and the relationship between, the elders and the young people, how female and male kind of like relate to each other. And the very interesting thing is that in the spirit of intimacy, she also speaks about like queerness and queer people. Of course, she doesn't use the same language that we use now, but there is a specific chapter that she dedicates to queer people and how important they are in the society, and their role, between, the physical world and the spiritual world, and how they navigate through that, because of the gift, right? So this book was just, it's very, it's easy to read, I would say. And there are kind of like pieces of wisdom that she shared throughout her life that was transcribed into writing. So the first bulk of the knowledge was shared orally through interviews or speeches that she would give. And then they made that book, The Spirit of Intimacy, that kind of like gather most of her teaching on community, on intimacy. Yeah, so oral literature, that's kind of like the basis, right, of her work. So it's alive. Like when you read, you really feel, the aliveness of the essence of oral literature. Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna ask, so you mentioned that Sobonfu's of the Dagar people, and I, I'm really looking forward to in this course, like learning from their philosophies and ways of being and
Mhm.
knowing, and in particular, but also the thing that it inspires in me, and I'm sure, like I'm curious about like how whether it's inspired in you as well, is just that longing and interest and fire to also find out about my own culture and what do we do when it comes to
Mhm.
think about kinship
Yes.
and family and what are our rituals. And I'm Igbo, and there's been incredible books by people like Nkiru and Zegu on writing about Igbo
Mhm.
philosophies of community. And so yeah, from you, like reading the work of griots like Sobonfu and others, has it inspired you to also want to just delve into your own culture as well?
Yes, definitely has, especially learning the language, right? Because it's such an important part of the culture, and it's in a people's language you find the basis of their worldview, right? When you learn a language, there is the philosophy embedded in that. There is the culture, even how they greet, and what it means. And I don't know if you remember when we had, I mean, no, I don't think it was in that specific course, like we will dance with mountain, but there is a teacher in that course, Bishop, I forgot his name. And one day he was talking about, like I was watching one of his stories, videos on YouTube, and he was talking about, greeting in Zulu, Saubona, and what that short words mean. It's like acknowledging not only you but the people around you, your ancestors, your lineage, right? So in that short word in the language, you find their philosophy, you find how they perceive, a human being who is not only singular, but a human being carry its whole lineage. So when I address the person, when I greet the person, I greet its own lineage, right? So really I'm inspired. I'm always saying that, but I want to learn my language. But there's so many, like, life. But this is really, you know, something that I would want to definitely learn, especially when you have, like, family reunion, or when you go to the village and you have to learn the customs, express as well yourself, in the language. So my father's tongue my father's mother tongue is called Ajuku, and my mom's mother tongue is Aizi, and they're both like Akan language. They are part of the Akan group, of West Africa. So those are also languages that that are imbued with the people's philosophy. And when I learn this language, I'll like, obviously I will learn about how we think, our worldview, how we view certain things, right? So in the people's language, there is all of these things that you know are information about the people. So throughout my research, I've definitely been inspired. Like, language was my main thing, and I learned Swahili actually in when I was doing my masters. I learned Swahili. I wanted to learn an African language, and I chose Swahili. But I still have a long way to go with my mother's tongue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's also. Oh,
And
your
also,
mom
like,
is.
what, like, in your journey, like, what was like, how did you get inspired? What is something that you would want to learn or know more about, your culture?
About me, from my end.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Um, I think what inspires me with the and even being drawn to this course and when you propose the idea is because community is
yeah.
so everything that we
Yeah.
do in my culture. So I'm from Delta State. My dad is from Ogwashuku, and my mom is from Onichibo, and they're like two, villages that are right next to each other. So he sometimes jokes
Mhm.
about that. About, and they met in DC, but they're from literally the
Wow.
same place, like from one to the other. And I grew up. My family are, we say kings obi, um,
Mhm.
but really it's not in the sense of how you would think, like with the British and all that. You're really a
Mhm.
keeper of people, you're
Mhm.
entrusted. And
Mhm.
so it's not hierarchical. I like to say, like, when I was growing up, the gates to my granddad's house were always open. Anyone could walk in.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
so those are things that, like,
Mhm.
way that we're taught to respect our elders or to view
Mhm.
people who are extended family as
Mhm.
your family. They're not your aunts and uncles, they're
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
auntie, they're your moms as well, and your
Mhm.
second father,
Yeah.
all these things. So,
Mhm.
and likewise with you, when you were saying with the greetings. So I have specific greetings for my parents, for my granddad, for every single member of the community and
Mhm.
families, and you have to remember those things. So I think what I'm really passionate about now is, I was always really interested in and invested in philosophy when I was in school.
Mhm.
I went to school in, South Africa and then in the UK for a lot of my life. And I was exposed to like Western philosophy and got really invested in learning about that. But I wanted to understand, I wanted to study, I wanted to study like African philosophies. And one of
Mhm.
my teachers actually told me there is no African
Mhm.
philosophy. I was
Yeah.
like, what does that what does that
Mhm.
how can that
Mhm.
possibly be true? So I went back
Yeah.
to my granddad and I was like, yeah, he told, my teachers told me there's no such thing as African philosophies. And he was like, well, that's to essentially say that there's no such thing as African people, that
Mhm.
we're
Exactly.
empty vessels, devoid of a kind of consciousness of the world, that we
Mhm.
weren't creating our own systems of knowledge. And that's clearly not true. Like I see it every single day in the
Exactly.
world around me.
Yeah.
So he really encouraged me to, like, he was like,
Mhm.
study, start with Igbo philosophy. And I think that's where I'm at now, is like there's a language element, even though I've been
Mhm.
studying, when I was in South Africa, we were studying Sutu and Zulu. Then when I went
Mhm.
to the UK, is French and Mandarin. So having the
Mhm.
space for my own language is something I
Mhm.
need. I think
Mhm.
right now it's also fundamentally kind of getting in tune with like what makes us who we are as people in our most dignified and healthy and thriving sense. What is the
Mhm.
essence of our, yeah, our way of life? that we can
Mhm.
continue to pass down for generations? And where does that intersect with all the other cultures of the world? So yeah,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
where
Wow. That's beautiful.
yeah, thank you. So I wasn't expecting to be answering questions, but I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's talk about I see a lot of people being drawn to the idea of ancestral knowledge or intergenerational wisdom. Like this is a topic that I feel is so important right now, and a lot of people are just being attracted to. So myself included. So how do you
Mhm.
feel? How do you frame African literature and storytelling as part of this conversation about reconnecting with intergenerational wisdom and its importance?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. So I'll go back to oral history or whole tradition, right? Which is famously, attached to the continent, the continent of orality and oral literature. So how does that fit into this idea of African literature? Of course, orality, sharing stories, telling tales, the griot being that custodian of history, of information, and having great memory to learn and absorb all of that, and then sharing that with the community, right? So griot, of course, like it's a French word that is derived from the Portuguese criado. But then if you go like in West Africa, different ethnic groups have different names for the word griot, right? In the Bambaha ethnic group, it's they're called Jeli. In the Wolof, they're called Gewol. And also, like in my mother tongue, they are called Kokoba, hence the name of the project, Kokoba, Meeting Our Griots. And those griots go through initiation throughout their life. They are wordsmiths, they are masters of speech, right? So within the community, they are the one known for just speaking very eloquently about the custom, the tradition. They are most of the time musician, they can be ambassadors, they can be genealogists, right? And they've been initiated to hone that information and then sharing that when it is needed, right? So those are these kind of like um, aspects of the griot. But you also have the griot who Amadou Mpateba, who is a Malian, writer, historian, ethnologist, who said that there is another type of griot who is called the jelly king or the Doma jelly, who has been initiated into knowledge, like the mystery school, right? So you have the jelly in general, who is a historian, who is a master of speech, but you also have that jelly who is a master of speech, but who has been initiated to the knowledge of a certain people, or even like knowledge in general from like, plant medicine, cosmology, cosmogony as well, psychology, all of this, which are part of the ancestral lineage of the people. So the jelly and the jelly king hone that knowledge, and through them we are able to learn from the ancestral knowledge, what people used to do back in the days, right? And then you have the writing aspects of African literature, whereby I feel like those people who write, they've embodied a certain kind of knowledge, of course, through the lineage. They embody the knowledge in their cell, right? And the subject that they choose to explore in their writing, whether it's ancestral knowledge or things that people used to do in their community or themselves as being, is kind of seen into the page or into the story that they will write, right? So it's like oral history, which encapsulates a knowledge of a people, which is ancestral, because speaking is a technology that have existed, throughout humanity, and then people use that to share stories orally, that is transcribed into, writing and different kind of stories, right? That is imbued with ancestral knowledge. So depending again of the kind of literature that you choose or that you will be drawn to, you will find that knowledge. You'll find that knowledge, whether it's through fiction, whether it's through historical novels. It's really depending on the subject that you read, But in African literature, there is a lot of like information, a lot of writings or topics about, ancestral knowledge, spirituality, people's custom and tradition. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, academic writing, but it can be through stories. Um, yeah, it can be through stories, or depending on the writers, the topic that they choose to write about. So it's really about, how to navigate that space and what knowledge the person is driven, to. And also, in terms of like knowledge, as a whole, and how people used to, I mentioned initiation. Initiation is or was, well, it still is, because in some, in certain spaces on the continent, people still go through initiation. And initiation is the school of life. And this is where, people within a community were given knowledge, right, through different rites of passages, depending on age, depending on gender. So initiation is also a big part of like, learning ancient knowledge. And when I was telling you about the griots, who is the griot king, who also goes through a certain kind of initiation depending on where it comes from, or the mystery school that, the griot come from. He will gain that knowledge through initiation. So from initiation to reading is also, a way to learn and embodying as well that knowledge in our everyday. The idea is really about like, when we read, what knowledge or what wisdom do we get from that reading, and how can we implement that as well in our everyday. And it can be the little thing, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I one way that I was kind of drawn into this as well is, my background is in like African feminist studies, and just uh became sort of a geek around the work of African women, like our writing, and even just learning that history. You find that like a lot of the time, um, there's such, like powerful wisdom that is held within even autobiographical pieces and fiction writing. And for a lot of African women, like, again, this is general, but especially like kind of pre-independence and the colonial period, fictional writing was a way of expressing our, values and political beliefs and things like that. And so even on that level, it's like there's so much to kind of be explored and discovered. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so something that we connected over is, the a shared belief in the importance of liberatory pedagogy, because
Mm-hmm.
you describe seeing African literatures and storytellings as portals to freedom, healing,
Mm-hmm.
and reimagination. You've mentioned the
Mm-hmm.
word imagination a few times. So, what is this course? What is the collective study of Sobon Fusome's work? And then beyond that, what is it inviting us to reimagine and to heal from?
Mm-hmm. I think it's first of all inviting us to opening our mind, being open to learn about different ways of approaching life, different ways of being, on this planet. It's really about like opening our mind and welcoming those teachings, those wisdom that are, rooted in the Dargar people in Burkina Faso, that has been they had a transmission through, Sobum Fusome and her work, right? So the first thing is really being, it's an invitation to open our mind to different ways of being, different ways of seeing, of course, intimacy and relationship and community and kinship, and life in the society as a whole, and nurturing ourselves with that, and knowing that, there are different ways of being is freeing, is liberating, and cultivating that as well, and knowing that, okay, I can choose something different. I don't have to follow certain things. There's a wide range of possibilities of, being and learning and sharing and being intimate with with people, with our community, with our extended family, with the trees, with the earth, so
Mm,
in the teaching of Sobun Fusome, there are so many wisdom into how to be as human, which is different from the dominant worldview,
yeah.
of being and of moving into the earth. So yeah, it's just being open to know that there are different possibilities of being, and then there's this is an offer, to learn and cultivate. Yeah. And it's also very intuitive, it's very intuitive. It's rooted in art, in creating. Rituals are our way of, art making. They're very creative. In one part of the book, she was saying that her grandmother sometimes will let her make, as a child, will let her set up altar for ritual. And it was a very creative um, activity where she would just, feel certain things depending on the teaching that she received. Like she will, gather certain things that reminds her of something that could be good for the art of the ritual, right? So it's just creative. It's also very, like, the course is embedded in thinking differently, thinking creatively, thinking intuitively, poetically about like intimacy, and how we can embody that in our everyday, in the little things. Yeah.
Oh, I love this. I love this so much. And I just remembered the phrase like when we were in the sort of planning for this course, as we were thinking about names, and we talked about like the everyday wisdom of African
Mm-hmm.
life.
Yeah.
So I love
Mm-hmm.
that, the everyday of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much, Karen. If for those of you who are listening, if you're not already as excited as I am, we're gonna keep sharing more information. Are interested, the course begins on November 22nd of this
Mm-hmm.
year. Classes will take place weekly on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and you can find more information and sign up on meetingourgriots.com. So MEETING, our griots. So I almost had, but yeah. So um, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you again, Karen, for joining.
Yes. Thank you so much. That was fun. I'm so
Yeah, you're
excited.
welcome.